Coming up, Bill Belichick made an appearance and quite an impression at Georgia's Pro Day. We'll give you all the details next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everyone, welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We're glad to have you with us here. A lot of football to talk about here over the course of the next 60 minutes. A little basketball before we close out the show today. You got pro days around the SEC. You got spring practice. I think I said this earlier in the week and I may have been wrong. I think now I can officially say that surely to goodness everybody started spring practice by now.
Yeah, I think so, and you're right. The story's picking up steam, and obviously we're going to get into pro days today. Staffers being added and coaches having a lot to say as well.
Yeah, so we'll do all that. Of course, our big news around the SEC. We call it our first and 10 every single day here on SEC Country Live. We'll start with item number 1 on our list. Georgia had its pro day yesterday, and representatives from all 32 NFL teams were on hand, much the same way they will be for all of the SEC teams when they have their pro day. What made the Georgia Pro Day a bit unique is Bill Belichick, one of the guys in attendance, the all-time great New England Patriots coach. Not only was he on hand to be a spectator and take some notes and do some scouting, but he also got involved in some of the coaching here a little bit. Mike, I want you to see some of this video of Belichick in action here. Watch him leading the drills, doing the instruction here, getting guys involved. That's Paul Pasqualoni, a former college coach at Syracuse, also working there on your screen. How unusual is it for you to see a guy like Belichick pretty heavily involved in some of the stuff that's going on here?
I think it's pretty unusual for every college football pro day. I don't know the last time I've actually seen a head coach, and you see it from time to time. And I think that Sean Payton's always been one of those guys that gets involved. I understand that Dan Quinn's been one of those guys with the Falcons, but I don't know that I've ever seen Bill Belichick do it. I guess the fact that these are linebackers and it's such a star-studded class coming out of Georgia, he wants to get an up front and center look. But I thought it was important that he's giving. Not only is he asking them to do things, but he's actually giving coaching techniques when you listen to what he's telling these players. Explode through the hips, extend your arms, control the block, things like that. I thought it was awesome to watch. I mean, it was kind of a big story. I heard that this was one of the most attended, I can't remember who tweeted it yesterday. Somebody tweeted it and said, this is one of the most attended pro days that I have ever seen in college football. So I think it's a big deal.
Now, well, you're a guy that obviously, had a great NFL career. You dealt with a lot of famous coaches. Nick Saban's more famous now than he was when you played for them, although he's a pretty big deal back then, too. Is it weird getting coached by a super famous guy? I mean, Lorenzo Carter, Devante Smith, Roquan Smith, a lot of the guys who are going through these drills with Belichick here, they're going to have big names potentially made for themselves in the NFL, but they're not Bill Belichick level famous. Is it sort of weird getting a level of instruction like that from a guy that you've seen virtually in every Super Bowl seemingly for the last decade?
Yeah, it is interesting. And I went through, obviously, the Combine, and you get to meet some of these coaches. I remember meeting, Coach Tomlin from up in Pittsburgh. You meet Pete Carroll. You meet Tony Sparano. You go through drills with some of these guys. And it is interesting. When they put their input in, that their words carry much more weight than anybody else's words. You can look good to scouts. You can look good to position coaches. But when they get in that draft room, that head coach's opinion is going to be valued a lot more. So you do try to step up to the plate and do anything those guys ask you.
In our Facebook comment section, Clint Clement says, hey, I'm mowing yards right now. Cut to the real stuff. Get to some Gator talk. We'll try to talk some Florida for you later on today. Clint here on SEC Country Live. For now, though, let me let you hear from Georgia coach Kirby Smart, who kind of went into some detail to describe exactly what Bill Belichick was doing in the drills that you just saw. Here's Kirby Smart.
Pretty common. I know the year I spent there, it's really just whoever wants to jump out there and do it. I know he's got a passion. He loves the game. He loves coaching. So it's a chance for him to get out there and coach guys and make them better and evaluate talent.
In the comment section, Rick Keene says, does he teach them how to cheat? It is true that Belichick is not the warmest figure, not certainly very highly regarded by a lot of fans, unless you happen to be a New England Patriot fan. But, for Georgia, and y'all know I am a Georgia fan, so I say this with a grain of salt, but for Georgia, this is a pretty good commercial for the program, is it not?
I don't think there's any doubt. And I mentioned that somebody, actually more than one person, tweeted yesterday this was the most attended pro day that they had ever seen. I think when you look at the amount of talent, not only that, but how highly thought of a lot of these guys are inside and outside of that program. It brings kind of two angles for me when you hear news like that. The most attended pro day that you've ever seen. Number one, boy, Georgia, development, talent, I mean, they're reaching obviously the pinnacle of what you see in college football right now. But it also begs another question. How hard is it going to be for Kirby Smart to be able to replace some of these guys? When you have Bill Belichick, that's going through drills with your linebackers. I don't know if you just plug another group in. So that's another kind of storyline that I follow along with this news.
Cliff Nelson says, did anybody check if the air pressure in the balls that Belichick was coaching with, were they all regulation? Not quite sure about that. Obviously, Belichick's presence is a big deal for guys who do what we do for a living. But for Kirby Smart, he sort of downplayed the whole thing, saying, you know, really, it's not as unique as you might think it is. Here's a little bit from Georgia coach Kirby Smart.
He did a lot of drills that were recognition drills, which what we're always trying to do is how do you respond when somebody moves? You don't ever get to see that at a combine. You're just running around hoops, running through bags, running 40s, jumping. But the game of football is a reaction game. So when a guy moves, what do you do? And I think that's what he's trying to simulate, and it's a great drill.
And another one of those comments, Kirby Smart said, you know what, you see this kind of thing go on from time to time. It's not really all that unusual to see this kind of happening there. So a pretty interesting day overall for Kirby Smart, even if he's going to try to downplay it a little bit right there.
I love hearing the insight from some of these coaches. I think it's so fascinating. You don't usually get to hear Bill Belichick up close. You know, usually every now and then, like on NFL Network, it's like there's a mic'd up segment and you get to hear what exactly he's talking about. There were some interesting words coming out of his mouth, though, in these linebacker drills. You know, don't shed the block, control the block. Use the offensive lineman's body against him. Put the offensive lineman into the hole. You know, kind of this two-gap mentality. It's interesting for me to hear that from Bill Belichick's perspective. I got to think that that's something Kirby Smart obviously has been teaching at Georgia, but I got to think it's been interesting for those guys to hear it as well coming out of Belichick's mouth.
Bradley Bush says, too bad that's all Mark Richt's players. In other words, Kirby Smart better not be patting himself in the back for this too much. It's Richt's players who are kind of going through this, and I guess that is true. That all the guys who are going through the Georgia Pro Day here this week were all guys recruited at the University of Georgia by Mark Richt, and for the most part, I think Georgia fans still have a lot of affection for Richt and do give him some credit for the impact he made on that team.
I will tell you this, though, because obviously I saw this transition from Mike Shula, who was pretty beloved amongst some Alabama fans, but you're obviously happy to get Nick Saban on there. I don't know, and I'm not trying to take shots at what Mark Richt was. Obviously, he put a ton of players in the NFL, but I don't know if this pro day is that well attended, if this is still Mark Richt there. I think that Kirby Smart's ability to really develop these players is what has sent a lot of these guys to the next level. It's a lot of the same players, but I think you got a lot more out of them under Kirby Smart, and that's the reason all these scouts are there to watch.
Let's do item number 2 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. LSU's been spring practicing now for a while, so much so they've already had a scrimmage in the books here. And we know these scrimmages are, for the most part, real football, but they take place away from the watchful eye of the media, so sometimes it's a little bit hard to kind of know what goes on. Some coaches are a little bit more forthright about the proceedings than others. For LSU, there was some talk that the first scrimmage, anyway, dominated by the defense. Let's take a look at what Nick Suss wrote about this at SECCountry.com. He says, a handful of LSU football players detailed the Tigers' first spring scrimmage of 2018 on Tuesday, with everyone agreeing the defense won the day, which isn't unusual. Nick Suss goes on to write, though, it's almost always easier for defense to install quicker than an offense, let alone an offense with a new coordinator. Here's where things get interesting. He says, but there's a difference between winning a scrimmage and dominating a scrimmage. And the early indications are the defense pulled off the latter. That's Nick Suss saying the LSU defense dominated the offense in LSU's first spring scrimmage, and he went on to kind of discuss, does this mean that it's going to be a great and dominant LSU defense in 2018? It very well may be. LSU's been terrific on defense many times before. I'm not so sure that it's good news, though, that LSU's offense got, quote, dominated in the first spring scrimmage. So I'll ask you, good or bad news that the LSU offense got dominated?
Well, first of all, I think if you're an LSU fan, it's not good news that your offense is lagging behind, but I don't think it's unexpected, right? I mean, I think you kind of expect this with a new quarterback, a new running back, a couple of new offensive linemen, some new wide receivers. This is going to be expected, and this is something you deal with every spring if you're an offense, right? Because offense is built on guys working together. Offense is built on timing. Offense is built on, does the quarterback know where the routes are going to lead? Are you on the same page as everybody else? The defense can just fly around. Somebody can almost mistake themselves into making a good play on defense, and so that's usually what happens. The concerning part for me, when you read into this article, the offense got shut out. This wasn't just a dominant effort by LSU, like in terms of yardage. There wasn't any points put on the board by LSU's offense at all. And so when you look back and think through the depth, especially when you look at the depth problems that LSU's having in the secondary, you would think that at some point one of these quarterbacks in the quarterback competition could have done some kind of damage with some of those young wide receivers.
On Facebook, Pretty Tony says, that's nothing new to us. Defense always is what LSU's going to be known for, that defense there. I think that's the problem for Ed Orgeron, though, because he was brought in, or I should say, it's probably more accurate to say, Les Miles was fired because they wanted to see change on an offense. So here's just a fact. LSU could have an LSU-type defense. Dave Aranda's a great coordinator. They could be great on defense, and LSU could win 9 games, could maybe even win 10 games. If they're not good on offense, it's still going to be a problem for Orgeron. His popularity is going to shrink. This is about changing what the program has been. LSU fans, we've heard from them now for more than a year on this show and on SEC Country, going back even predating the existence of SEC Country Live. LSU fans want something different from the program. They want to see offense. So I do think, and listen, I'm not going to make too big of a deal about one scrimmage because offense does typically sort of lag behind defense. What Nick wrote on that is probably true. But you better, by the second or third scrimmage, hear about an offense sort of finding its own a bit.
Yeah, and listen, Clip Nelson says it on the YouTube page. Until they commit to one quarterback, the defense will win. When a starter gets starter reps, the offense will be better. And I don't actually agree with that. I think when you look at these scrimmages, what you have is first-string quarterback's going to get first-string reps against first-string defense. You're going to have second-string quarterback against second-string defense. You're going to mix and match a lot of these guys. And at some point, somewhere down the road, you would have thought one of these guys would have broken out. You got this running back competition. These running backs are grabbing. You got a really deep wide receiver rotation going on. At some point, you'd think somebody would make an explosive play and get these young linemen out in front of some of these guys. Just didn't happen. I understand that you love what Braden Fehoko looked like. Eric Monroe, the young safety, was mentioned a ton in these kind of post-game presser, after the scrimmage, talking about what they're doing back in the secondary. So I understand that you have elite talent on the defensive side of the ball, but it's not like you don't have it on offense either. So I'll be interested to see as we go through spring, if the next time they get on the field and scrimmage against each other, if there's some type of offensive output.
Stacy Hinman on Facebook says, but LSU's got their quarterback on campus. That's what Coach O told us, right?
Yep.
And, to go back to Cliff's point, obviously I love Cliff, one of our commenters. He says until they select one quarterback, you're going to have these problems offensively against the defense in the scrimmage. The problem is just selecting a starting quarterback doesn't make him a starting quarterback. The reason why not one hasn't been selected is because one's not distinguishing himself yet.
Right.
At least that's my assumption based on the descriptions that you're getting there.
Yeah, and listen, I got to give Tyler Mann a shout out too. He tweeted a video of Foster Moreau, the tight end, earlier, talking about the quarterback competition and talking about what exactly each of these guys bring to the table. And it almost sounded like, in Foster Moreau's words, by the way, I became a huge fan of his watching that video, but it almost sounded in his words that one of those guys really hasn't stepped out. One guy has zip on the ball. One guy has leadership. One guy has that underdog swagger. They all joke with each other. They're all kind of equal. It's an actual quarterback competition. So I don't know if there's any into it in sight. I think that LSU fans would probably love for one guy to be stepped out and named the starter, but I don't think it's coming anytime soon.
Let me say this real quick off the subject for a moment. I've seen a few comments today from guys who are like, hey, y'all, I got to get back to work. Charlie Jones, who's a great commenter, was mentioning, hey, y'all, got to get back to work. 98 Sports Talk on YouTube was saying that his work schedule's changed a little bit. He's not able to watch the show live anymore. We certainly appreciate you guys watching whenever you can. So if you're not watching as we air live at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Central, if you're checking on this show later on, thanks for checking the show when you can. We think that both YouTube and Facebook provide a pretty good on-demand feature for you to be able to come back and check on the show. And listen, some of you are able to stop by for a few minutes, have to get on to work. Even if you can only give us a few minutes during the day, we certainly appreciate you stopping by just to say hello if you have time. That's an incredibly generous thing to do. So thank you very much.
Yeah, we genuinely love hanging out with you guys on a daily basis. The reason we do this show right now, I love, like I said, I've always said, the roundtable feeling and having the banter back and forth with every SEC fan base is a lot of fun.
Stacy Heineman in the comment section says, Mike, pronounce my last name for BA. It's Heineman. Sounds like hi. Here's the thing. I may have mispronounced your name, but if you think this guy's going to come to your rescue on pronouncing something correctly, you got another thing coming.
I got to give a shout out to our guy Benjamin Walk, our Auburn writer here at SEC Country. He texted me yesterday after the show and said, Igbenogany, you nailed it. Igbenogany, is it Noah Igbenogany transferred or switched from running back or wide receiver to DB at Auburn? I'm telling you right now, I was so proud of myself when he texted me. Because he climbed up me, I was like, no, I think I got this one right, and I'm feeling pretty good.
How many times are you going to take a victory lap for that?
No, probably at least once more before the end of today, for sure.
Let's do item number 3 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Another one of those schools getting going with spring practice this week, and another one of those schools with a brand new coach is Mississippi State and Joe Moorhead. Thought of as an offensive genius. We actually covered that a little bit earlier in the week on SEC Country Live, and a guy who's sort of settling into the role of first-time head coach. Moorhead was asked by some of the media there in Starkville how the installation process is going on all 3 phases, given the fact that practice is pretty new with the new guy in charge here. Here is Joe Moorhead sharing his thoughts.
No, I think so in all three phases, special teams, offense, and defense. It was, for all of us going a million miles an hour today because you're teaching and learning essentially a new language and a new way to practice. So from every small detail of the practice scripts and where we're at on the field and the clocks and the drills and how we want things done. So, under the circumstances, for being, brand new for day one, I was pleased but not satisfied.
So I could be wrong about this, but my assumption is, when you look at another brand new first-time head coach, Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee, compare him to Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State for a moment, there's an aspect of which Moorhead's job is probably a little bit easier because he's got his quarterback in place. Now, Nick Fitzgerald's been hurt, but my assumption is we've seen him running already. My assumption is that Fitzgerald's going to be fine and plenty healthy by the start of the fall, if not by the end of the spring. So if we assume that Fitzgerald is a sort of a rock-solid quarterback from Mississippi State, isn't the job of being brand new head coach, running practices for the first time ever, isn't that job made easier by the fact that you've got your quarterback ready to go?
I think it definitely is. I think that if you gave Jeremy Pruitt or Dan Mullen or Jimbo Fisher the opportunity to have a guy that's locked in, a guy like a Jake Bentley who is obviously the guy over at South Carolina, then I think you feel pretty good about it. But I don't think it lessens the task that he's talking about. And he kind of goes on to say during that clip that it's a stretch to say they had a great practice. They thought they had a very good practice. And I think that's important to look at because it's just like Jeremy Pruitt said in yesterday's show. These guys, these coaches, everybody involved in this program is learning a new skill. They're learning a new way to practice. They're learning a new tempo. They're learning where things go and how to operate things and making sure everybody is getting the reps they need to within that window. Because listen, there's a timer on these practices. It's not like NFL where you go out and you practice till you get it done. There's a timer on these things. So there's got to be snaps going off everywhere. I understand what Joe Moorhead's saying, that you're kind of locking things into place, and it's a process to make sure everybody gets up to speed.
We touched on this earlier in the week. But Moorhead sounds smart.
Yes.
Mississippi State shared like 5 minutes worth of audio from him, and when he's speaking, he just has a little bit of I don't know if it's bass in his voice or a confidence in his voice or what, but he sounds smart. This brand that he's been given of, hey, this guy's an offensive genius, he certainly plays the part of that. Now, I think there's a way in which sometimes intelligence can be overrated. I think coaching is more about other things sometimes than being the smartest guy in the room. But if that's what you want him to be, smartest guy in the room, Moorhead does come across that way.
Listen, he just sounds. It's not even so much the smartest guy in the room. He sounds like an SEC football coach. I think that's.
I don't think so. He sounds, and this is not a criticism, but he sounds different than an SEC coach. There's a cadence that other SEC coaches use, and maybe it's the accent. He doesn't have really a Southern accent, but the vibe that I get is not SEC coaching vibe, but it is guy who's confident, comfortable in his own skin vibe, but it's not SEC vibe for me.
Let me try to reword that. Maybe this will sound better. I think he sounds like an SEC caliber head coach. Maybe he doesn't sound like other, but he sounds to me like he's ready for this role. And I think that's a big point for Mississippi State fans. You don't listen. The head coach at what was it, Furman, that he was a head coach at, or something like that. And then he goes up in his offensive coordinator at Penn State, and now he takes back over a head coaching role at a huge SEC university. I got to tell you, I feel better just listening to him speak than I do about some of the other first-time head coaches. I think he sounds better than Matt Luke right now. I think he sounds better than maybe even Chad Morris right now. I think he kind of puts off that aura that Mississippi State fans are looking for.
Let me get a few YouTube comments here. 98 Sports Talk says Mississippi State set up to succeed. Actually, let me scroll back and get this from the top. He says Mississippi State set up to succeed. They have players coming back. That's also sort of echoed by Tyler Mann here, who says, I think Mississippi State's going to struggle a bit while adjusting to a new coaching staff. So you combine those two comments together, here's what you have. You have a pretty talented roster. They're going to be a preseason top 25 team by almost everyone's estimation. In a way, Moorhead, even though he's not a super famous coach right now, he actually steps into Mississippi State with a pretty good bit of first season pressure, probably more so than Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee, where most expectations are outside the top 25, struggling to win 6 games. There are people who think that Mississippi State can win 9 or 10 games this season. It actually puts a little bit of pressure on Moorhead at that point.
And they have a lot of winnable games, too. And I know they play in the SEC West, but when you look at how their schedule starts to stack up, you've got non-conference with Kansas State, who Vanderbilt beat last year, Stephen F. Austin, Louisiana Raging Cajun. At Kentucky, that's your first 4 weeks. And so I agree with you. I think the pressure's there. And I think we've already heard it, like we've talked about before, with Brandon Walker being around here. You hear it from Mississippi State fans. 18 of 21 returners, 10 returning starters on offense, minus Martinez Rankin. They definitely have the players and the dynamic playmaker ability on the offensive side of the ball to make a lot of noise. I just wonder what that ceiling is. Is Joe Moorhead, is he going to air it out? Is he going to say, man, we're just going to break through this ceiling? Or at some point, do you go to Alabama, do you go to LSU, and do you go to Auburn and say, boy, we're still kind of in that role?
One more on YouTube. I said that Moorhead sounded smart. Esteban Esteves on the YouTube page says he is not smarter than Dave Aranda. That's the LSU defensive coordinator. Esteban's an LSU fan, so that Mississippi State-LSU rivalry hot and heavy again here in our comment section today, which is always a lot of fun. All right, let's do item number 4 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And when Nick Saban met with the media earlier this week, one of the subjects he got into was a lot of new faces around the Alabama program. And for once, it's not players transitioning in and transitioning out. A lot has been made of the new face on the Alabama coaching staff. Remember, coordinators gone, position coaches moving on to other jobs, and Nick Saban was forced to make a lot of hires. Well, based on what Saban said this week, he's happy with the hires that he made. Here's Coach Saban.
They're all working hard, and they've got a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of new ideas. I'm excited about our staff. These guys have been great. They're really aggressive recruiters. The players like them. I'm really excited about them. I really am. Now, there's a lot of changes on our staff. I can't deny that. We got a new defensive coordinator, we got a new offensive coordinator, we got a new special teams coordinator, we've got 6 new faces, around here, but they all seem to fit in, and they're all doing extremely well, and I'm excited about them, and I like every one of them, and to be honest with you, I think we were very, very fortunate and hit a home run with the guys that we were able to hire.
So that's Nick Saban talking about some of those new hires, and I'm going to give you a lot of credit for this. You sort of pointed out the trend on these hires in the early going here, that Saban's going to lean in the direction of energy. Yeah. He uses the word recruiting there. You said that all of these would be sort of about recruiting and sort of upgrading that, maybe modernizing the Alabama recruiting approach, and clearly echoed by what Saban says there. That was a big part of what they decided to do, wasn't it?
I think it definitely was. I think that plays out in 2 different phases, too, when you look at Alabama. It's recruiting, and I think that was first and foremost for the decisions he's made. I think that I think when he got those phone calls and said, Coach Saban, I'm going to Florida, I'm going to Georgia, I'm going somewhere else, I think he took note of what those guys' kind of criticisms were. Hey, I'm really vibing with what Coach Mullen's doing down at Florida. I really like what Jeremy Pruitt's doing up there. I feel like I can kind of connect with him. Kirby Smart's just got this young energy. It's an up and coming program. I think he took note of that, and I think he said, you know what, maybe we should get younger, more energetic. Obviously, the Alabama staff has started reaching out on Twitter and doing some things that they haven't done in the past. But I think another angle to look at it. Listen. This was Nick Saban after practice. He's talking about how much energy they have on the football field. He's talking about guys bouncing around, the excitement. That's one of those things. Watching the film yesterday from Tennessee, from Florida, you want to see those assistant coaches that are getting everybody jacked up. You don't want to see people standing around kind of taking silent notes on what's going on. Make sure the excitement is there. That's why some of these programs, they play music on the practice field. Scott Cochran jumps up and down. They got kind of that going on. It's important to have those excitement around these spring practices. You're not building towards anything, just a spring game. So to build up that excitement gets guys to play a little harder.
And it's not just the on-field coaches. Saban was talking about those there. Other additions to the Alabama staff and the on-field analyst role. That's something that's gotten a lot of attention. Butch Jones, we'll have some more on that later on in our show today. But also pulling another name from the NFL, at least according to what Ian Rappaport reported on Twitter. He says former Raiders quarterback coach Jake Peetz, thought to be Josh McDaniels' offensive coordinator had he taken the Colts job, has landed in the college game as an Alabama offensive analyst under Nick Saban. Would expect him back in the NFL at some point. Now listen, I'm no Alabama fan, but this is another example of, while I'm going to poke some holes in what I do view as some sort of Saban recruiting misses as of late. This is an area where Saban is as strong as he's ever been. The Raiders quarterback coach, the guy that would have worked as Colts offensive coordinator, working as an analyst, that's just a good job to have that. Even if he's just parked in Tuscaloosa for a year, man, that is just a good guy to be able to bring into your program. It's another example of, Saban stays strong in that regard.
I think it really is a good hire. And before I get going on this topic, too, for all you guys that think I'm a Bama homer, I had to give credit to Ed Orgeron, who actually made a huge hire this week as an analyst, and Kevin Coyle, who was a coordinator in the NFL for a while, comes down. He's going to be an analyst down in Baton Rouge for LSU this year. I think that's an equally big hire when you look at these two guys. But it does kind of, we talked about the kind of the celebrity that is Bill Belichick earlier, and kind of this Nick Saban thing. It's almost like, and Peetz has been at Alabama before. I think he was an offensive analyst back in like 2013 before he goes to the NFL. But this is like a landing spot. This has become kind of a backboard for some of these careers. Oh, my career might be able to stumble. Let me go get that year down in Tuscaloosa and make sure I land back on my feet when those opportunities come back around. It never, listen, and there's, I think somebody said it in the YouTube section earlier, maybe there's too many voices in that Alabama offense room. Maybe that's true. But I'm just telling you right now, I would rather have too many than too little. I think it's huge to have a lot of these guys, specifically guys that can work with quarterbacks on this team.
But we do have to see dividends quick here, because I'm going to say what I said yesterday at the end of the show. This idea that Saban's going to coach Alabama for another 5 years, not if they don't see this quick turnaround in recruiting. Now, when I say turnaround, I mean after 1 year of not being number one. So there's an asterisk here. It's not a disaster, but it's not what it once was. A lot of these changes were made to sort of reignite those recruiting passions. But recruiting's getting harder. As Michael Cooper mentioned in the comment section earlier, Kirby Smart's not going anywhere. Dan Mullen, through some of the stuff that he's doing, going after guys like Trey Sanders. That's a running back that Alabama really wants. There's a lot of guys in the SEC. Dabo, Willie Taggart from the ACC, they're going after the same players Alabama wants. It's getting harder to recruit in the South because of the rise of a lot of these programs that have almost all leaned in the direction of recruiting with their overhaul.
Yeah, and listen, I'll give Jimbo Fisher credit, over at Texas A&M, and even Dan Mullen landing at a place like Florida. Dan Mullen's been in the SEC. He was in the SEC West with Alabama, but it gives him a lot more of a springboard to be at a place like Florida with all those athletes in his backyard. So, listen, I agree with you. I think recruiting is getting much tougher for anybody. I don't know if there's a finite number of great recruits each year. I don't know if there's always like 25 stars and you got to kind of disperse those, but they are definitely going to be harder to find. It's almost like who can get the ball rolling first, who can get that 5-star on campus first and get that guy committed, and then see if he can start committing some of these other guys.
One of the top quarterbacks in the SEC is the subject of item number 5 here in our SEC Country Line 1st and 10 list. It is Drew Lock, who put up big numbers for Missouri a season ago, decides to come back for his final year. But one big change there in Columbia, Missouri. So I'm going to have Josh Heupel, the quarterback and offensive coordinator that had led him to a great success. Heupel takes the head coaching job there for the national champions, UCF, and I say that tongue-in-cheek. His replacement, the former Tennessee coach Derek Dooley, and apparently a lot like some of what he's seen from Derek Dooley's offense thus far. Here's a quote from Locke from the Kansas City Star saying that it's more complicated of an offense, but I think it's easier. It was a little more guessing games last year on what I thought receivers were going to run. This year I have it set in stone what they're going to do every single play. It makes me a lot more comfortable back there. I know exactly what's going on. So it sounds like for now Drew Lock feels comfortable in the Derek Dooley offense. Yeah. This for me is a little bit of the same kind of puffery we heard yesterday with Braden Fajoko talking about the LSU quarterbacks. I mean, obviously there's all a big
springtime,
a big love fest between quarterback and his new offensive coordinator. But I mean, Lock really gave some relevance to Missouri when he chose to come back. Now, I'm not sure how high he would have been drafted had he gone to the NFL, but he helped Missouri out a lot when he came back. The least they could do was give him a competent offensive coordinator for his final season. Is Derek Dooley that guy?
I actually, these words that he was able to, and this is what I read from what he said. I read that the scheme is more complicated, but it's easier to execute. That's what I'm kind of reading out of Drew Lock's words right here. That maybe it's a little bit easier to understand is what he said, but to me, I think a lot of the concepts with the wide receivers last year at Missouri was, okay, if this guy's lining up in front of you like this, you're going to run this route. If he's doing this, you run that route. So that leaves Drew Lock kind of making signals, kind of a guessing game. Is my guy going to run an out route? Is he going to run a 9 route? Is he going to run the post? Is he going to run fade? You kind of have to guess that play in and play out. But the scary thing is that's why Missouri was so good at times on offense. It was because of that inability of the defenses to really know what was going on. Now it feels like with this Derek Dooley offense, maybe there's a lot more scheming that you can do for it. As an offensive guy, you look at that. These defenses are going to be watching film. If you're not making them guess at the line of scrimmage, I'm wondering how far this Derek Dooley offense can go.
Yeah, so listen, I'm going to be very blunt about this. Anybody who can call plays is. This is a very well-paid job, and there's a lot of fame that comes your way. It's a springboard to being a head coach. If you're good enough to call plays, you are calling plays.
Right.
Josh Heupel's a better offensive mind than Derek Dooley is. You know how I know? Because for the last however many years, Heupel's been calling plays somewhere. He was at Missouri. He was at Utah State before that. In some form or fashion, he's going to have control of the offense as head coach at UCF. What's Derek Dooley been doing? He was wide receivers coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Yep. He was head coach at Tennessee with an unspectacular offense. He was not thought of as sort of the offensive mastermind there. If he was a great play caller, if he was an offensive genius, he'd have already been running somebody's offense before this year. I'm not telling you that there was a better person out there for Missouri to hire. It's hard to find an OC. But this notion that Derek Dooley was a great offensive coordinator who just happened to be, massaging Des Bryant's shoulders in Dallas.
That's a bad job.
That is just not true.
Yeah, it's tough for me, too, because, listen, I think that when you're Barry Odom, you had to go out and make some type of splash hire. You had to get somebody on campus because we've said it before, Barry Odom's job really is on the line this year in terms of this offense being good. Drew Lock's future is on the line. A lot of guys' future are on the line with this. So I think he felt like he had to have a big name. I'm just not sure Derek Dooley had the track record. You see, obviously he was good at Louisiana Tech. That landed him the Tennessee job. But I don't know. I just don't feel really good about the matchups there. I think he's seen great offenses, and I think he's been around great offenses, but can he put pen to paper and actually coach those up at a place like Missouri with Drew Lock? I'm just not sure. I'm not sold on it.
Mike Tanner in the comment section says Barbara Dooley, his mother, would have been a better hire than Derek Dooley. That may have been true. Rick Keene, though, I'm a little surprised at this. Rick's a Florida fan. He says, I know you guys don't look at Dooley as a good hire, but mark it. I said it. Dooley's going to have that offense rolling. Defense was his problem at Tennessee. Listen, I would have never imagined we have a Florida fan coming into Missouri's defense on this.
Check you out, Rick. Check you out, Rick.
Are you surprised by that as I am?
Yeah, I'm definitely surprised that comes out of Rick's mouth. And listen, I understand the angle Rick takes about that because I think that Derek Dooley, like I said, he's been around those good offenses and he's seen those good offenses. I just don't know that landing at a place that ran the offense that Missouri did last year. Maybe that's kind of where I'm trying to take this. Missouri, this wide open spread where it was a guessing game for defenses and you had everybody spread out, going to a pro style under Derek Dooley with Drew Lock, to me, I don't know if that's the best marriage that I've ever seen.
All right, we'll get back to our SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list here in a moment, but college hoops action is back tonight. But there's more at stake for you potentially than just watching the games. You have a chance to be a winner when you play where the pros play with my friends at MyBookie. You've got the point spreads, the money line. Mike, you can even do in-game wagering. And that sounds to me like so much fun. You don't have to just get your bet in before tip. You can actually get in some action while the game's going on. Nothing sounds more fun
you
than
can bet on Texas or Kentucky or Texas A&M down by 20. Boy, I think they're going to come back. Let me slip that bet in. Probably plus 500 odds.
What a great thing that is. It's all at mybookie.ag. But right now, there's even better news than that. You can actually be a winner before the wagering even begins when you use the promo code SEC Live. Because when you use that promo code SEC Live, your first deposit can be matched up to 50%. But you got to do it right now. Promo code SEC Live, website mybookie.ag. You play, you win, you get paid. It's as simple as that. Check out mybookie.ag online. Make sure you use the promo code SEC Live, and your first deposit can be matched up to 50%.
98 Sports Talk says on the YouTube page, let's do some in-show wagering. Will BA say beef down on this show? Don't say it yet. Don't say it yet. Let's wait till we get to the topic. I love it.
Sometimes we talk about Jeff Sintel here on SEC Country Live. He's one of my buddies and partners on Dog Nation. He has actually made like a BA like bingo before of all the different things that I say. And then he's sort of passed those out. You can kind of play along and try to fill in your blank before the show's over with. Maybe we'll do it on SEC Country Live one day.
Yeah, listen, we had an over-under for what time you were going to get in your chair today. Was it going to be 2:58,
I'm working hard to get ready for the show. You and Hannah and Patrick and Casey, I know y'all just love making fun of me, but I'm working hard.
You hit it right on the over-under, too. Boy, you sat down right on time.
Patrick was the one, he won the bet. So, yeah. So, if you want to know what my life is like, my co-workers, who are supposed to be my teammates, are making wagers behind my back about, what screwed up thing I'm going to do from one day to the next. But you know what? It's a lot of fun to be here at SEC Country World Headquarters. We're glad you're with us here today on SEC Country Live. With that said, let's get back to our SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list. We talked to start the show with the Georgia Pro Day and the presence of Bill Belichick there and the excitement that exists for a lot of these Georgia players about to make their way into the NFL. But for one SEC Network and ESPN analyst Marcus Spears, the excitement around Georgia is not so much necessarily about the guys they're sending to the NFL right now, but the fact that big-time draft classes are about to become a fixture around the UGA program. Here's a little bit of Marcus Spears from the SEC Network throwing some pretty high praise Georgia's way.
I'm just excited about Georgia football and their program. Look, they have 7 first-rounders in the last 10 years. That number is about to start going up. It has a lot to do with what Kirby Smart is doing at Georgia, but they're attracting those type of players with that potential to have these type of pro days. I don't remember a Georgia pro day being this covered since I've been here. And I know they've had a lot of really good players, but I think people just start getting used to seeing Georgia in these pro days with a lot of dudes with the potential to go in day one.
We'll get to the Georgia stuff in a minute. A couple of comments in the comment section about what we were just discussing. Teresa Stewart says, BA, they're laughing with you, not at you. Listen, sometimes I think they may actually be laughing at me, but listen, I am fine with that. As long as they're laughing, that's my only goal in life, is to make people smile, make people laugh, so I'm fine with that either way. Michael Morrow says, to go back to the subject of maybe a bingo card with the different things that I say, he says coming up should be the center square on the BA bingo card. You have no idea how much grief that everybody gives me about the way we start the show every single day. We do the open for SEC Country Live and the way that I say coming up to start every show. I don't intend to say it quite that loud. It just sort of comes out that way. Yeah. This studio could not be more silent, more quiet when the show begins, and I just sort of shout that out. Everybody I think everybody sort of has their own version of mocking me on that. So, Michael, I'm glad that you're picking up on that too. But on the subject of Georgia here for a moment, and what Marcus Spears says, I think it's almost objectively true that when you look at the nation's number 3 recruiting class for 2017, number 1 class for 2018, this idea that Georgia's about to become a pipeline of first-round draft picks, something has gone horribly wrong if that's not true.
Yeah, listen, you could fill in the blank. Marcus Spears, name whoever you want to. I think it'd be harder at this point to find an analyst who doesn't believe that Georgia is heading in that direction. I mean, I think it's universally accepted that Georgia, no matter what happens this next year, it's still headed in the right direction under Kirby Smart. He's proved the ability to, it's like I named those guys earlier. He's proved the ability to develop guys to get them to a higher level than they would have been otherwise. And I think that's a huge trademark for him to be able to not only push that on players that he has under his program right now, but push it on recruits, push it to other NFL caliber players to get on campus and say, you know what, I will make you as good as you can possibly be by the time you leave the University of Georgia. I think that's why all the scouts show up. I think that's why you see Bill Belichick on campus, and I think that's why you see Marcus Spears and 100 other analysts that are talking that way about the Georgia program right now.
And ultimately, like everything else, it sort of goes back to recruiting for me in that, someone mentioned in the comment section earlier that the guys at this pro day for Georgia this week were all Rick recruits, and that's true. But in the future, you're going to see even more of those guys. Spears, the number he gives, the idea that there's only been 7 Georgia first-round picks in the last 10 years, regardless of the fact that there have been a lot of Georgia guys do well in the league, when you only have 7 first-round draft picks, and very few of those guys have been offensive linemen, you could sort of pick other position groups where Georgia has not produced pros. That's not good enough. And I say that as a guy who liked Mark Richt and had great respect for him. But that's an area in which Rick was not getting it done.
Yeah, it's completely true. When you talk about recruiting all the time, and we talk about stars, and we're talking about the caliber of player that are inside these programs. In 2007, when I was a sophomore in Alabama, we didn't have anybody drafted. We didn't have anybody drafted, and somehow the next year in 2008, we ended up with a first-round draft pick, and we've had one every year since 2008. And so I think that really to me is the hallmark of a great program. I think Kirby Smart's starting to head into that direction. And for the teams that are not getting those draft picks right now, I think that's a good kind of trademark to look for in your program. Does Dan Mullen start to get these guys that are going in the first round? Does Jeremy Pruitt start to get these guys that are going in the first round? See if your coach is developing that talent at a higher level.
All right, let me call timeout on our SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list, because J.J. Koch and some others are yelling at us. Haven't talked enough Florida today, haven't talked enough Tennessee. So let's just squeeze in a little Florida and Tennessee talk kind of before we get back to our SEC Country Live 1st and 10. We're sort of paused here in the early going for both the Florida and the Tennessee spring practices. Let's go off the cuff here for a moment. I mean, how do you think the early going for these practices, the vibe? Now, for Tennessee, it's been fewer practices than Florida. Florida's actually been going now for a while. But give me a little vibe on the Gators. Give me a little vibe on the Vols. We haven't mentioned them on today's show.
Yeah, I think so. Listen, watching those videos yesterday, you wonder about the energy at practice. You wonder, I thought the biggest thing about watching that tape yesterday for me was the fact that it was Felipe Franks, and then it was 2 other guys, then it was Emory Jones way down the list. We talk about these quarterback competitions. You talk about Emory Jones being an early enrollee. You wonder how fast Dan Mullen will kind of push him towards that type of role. But from what I saw yesterday, Emory Jones, to me, I wouldn't be shocked if he's headed for a red shirt this year. And that's obviously a complete overreaction to watching one day of film. But I think Dan Mullen really has his work cut out for him as far as that goes. And as far as the other positions go, I think everything I've read online and everything I've talked to about the SEC country guys down at Florida, these guys look different. Obviously, Nick Savage being a huge part of that. But I still have to see more film. I want to see how this spring – I'm telling you, I've got my eyes focused on Florida because I think that team could waver a lot this year. I think it's a team that really, with the number ones, are capable of winning 9 games. And I think they're capable of not going back to a bowl game this year, too, if things go south.
I think in the case of Florida, they have to have something to build around. They have to have somebody to rally around. And obviously, as you see quarterbacks there on your screen, you'd love for it to be Felipe Franks. You'd love for it to be one of the quarterbacks. if it can't be that, just be something. You know, Jordan Scarlett, he's looking great based on the photos that came out the other day. Build around the running game. You know, build around something, but you gotta have something that Florida fans can sort of hang their hat on. I think about this as like when I was a kid, the poster that you had in your room. Florida needs a player to put on a poster right now.
Yeah, and listen, you look at Felipe Franks right there, and obviously look at his throwing motion. He really does look like an SEC quarterback. I'm not sure that you can put some of these other guys, and Kyle Trask right there throwing the ball. You can put some of these other guys in that ticket. Emory Jones does not, though. When you watch Emory Jones throw the football, I don't think he looks like an SEC quarterback at all. So I think if you're Florida fans, you're starting to strap up with Felipe Franks. You're starting to get back behind this guy and wonder what his new height could be under Dan Mullen.
Yeah, absolutely. Teresa Stewart also talking about the way that Tennessee looked in its first spring practice. Jared Garantano, she says, was looking good there in that practice. But this one for me, though, I mean, it's all about when Keller Chris gets there in the summertime. That's what it all comes down to. Yeah, I'm not telling you that Chris is going to be the starter. I'm not doing that. I sort of gave the Malik Zaire job or the Florida job to Malik Zaire last summer.
Right, yeah.
That didn't work out. I'm not giving Chris the Tennessee job, but the real quarterback competition doesn't begin until the summer.
Well, I'll tell you this much. I thought that Tyson Helton, in some of his words after practice yesterday, really went out of his way, or maybe that was 2 days ago, to talk about JT Shrout, the freshman. I mean, really, I thought they went extremely far out of their way. He like mentions, Jared Garantano, he kind of mentions Will McBride, but then JT Shrout, when you talk about that, it's like, boy, this kid has a ton of upside. He looks like an SEC quarterback. He can really stand in the pocket. He can move his feet. He can deliver the ball. And obviously some of the questions might get steered that way, but I thought they were extremely complimentary of what they have.
Let me tell you something. That's terrible news for Tennessee because what's his name? JT Shrout?
JT Shrout.
He's got as good a chance to be the quarterback for the Vols as I do.
No. I think he's up there.
Not this year.
Yeah, that might be true. But listen.
That's not a good sign.
I think that when you have a new offensive coordinator, a new head coach, and a new style of offense, I really do. I think that you're starting from square one, and I think if it's got to be a freshman, listen, he can grow. I feel the same way about him that I do about Emory Jones. If he's going to be the guy in the long run, put him in there and get the lumps out of his way.
All right, let's get some back onto our SEC Country Live first and 10. And speaking of SEC East teams like the Vols and the Gators, let's talk about some of their competition. South Carolina here for a moment. I thought the Sports Illustrated writer Andy Staples had kind of an interesting take in a recent mailbag. He was asked about evaluating what Will Muschamp's done so far at South Carolina, and what Staples writes is that if Muschamp underachieved at Florida, he's overachieved to an equal degree at South Carolina. That word overachieved to me is interesting for some reason.
Yeah.
Would you describe what Muschamp has done so far at South Carolina as overachieving?
I think that's a tough word. I think that he's done extremely well. I think that he, honestly, in my opinion, won some games he probably shouldn't have last year, and I've made that well known on here. I mean, I talked about it the other day. And one-score games, they were like 6-0 or 6-1 or something like that, and that's just not the norm. That's something that's probably going to be corrected in the long run when you look at Will Muschamp. But I think what's exciting about that for South Carolina fans is he has overachieved at this point, but I think really, and Florida fans will probably attest to this, what dragged him down probably in years past was Kurt Roper being his offensive coordinator. And he has been, he has had this allegiance throughout his entire career to Kurt Roper being his offensive coordinator. Finally cuts ties with him. And I think that shows me that Will Muschamp is growing as a head coach and is willing to do, no matter how many buttons he's pushing, willing to do the things necessary to get this team to the next level.
Boy, I love that description, the notion that he's growing as a head coach. I think that's probably true, and that's one of the reasons why I don't love the word overachieved for Muschamp at South Carolina, because there's room for at least 2 top 25 teams in the SEC East, and why couldn't it be South Carolina? Not as much history as Tennessee, not as much history as Florida, but when those programs are not good, and lately the Gators and the Vols really haven't been, why couldn't South Carolina step up and take that opportunity? They're going to be a preseason top 25 team this year, and I don't think it's outlandish to think that's where they could finish the season. But here's the other thing, too. You just said that Will Muschamp has grown as a head coach. For me, he has grown so much that I just view him as a good coach without qualification. I think that Muschamp is a good coach. People get mad every time I say this. I don't say this to troll. I just happen to personally believe this. If you gave me a choice of a coach right now, the old Florida coach Will Muschamp, the new Florida coach Dan Mullen, I want to take Muschamp over Mullen. He's a better recruiter. He's got that sort of Saban pedigree in terms of the edge that he brings to the defense. If it's a sort of big state kind of just sort of unnamed team, which coach do I want? I want Muschamp over Mullen.
Yeah, that's why I say it's tough to say the word overachieve. I think he's right kind of in the powerhouse. I think he's right in the wheelhouse in terms of what he probably should be doing in South Carolina because, listen, for everything he did great last year, lost by 10 points to Kentucky, scored 13 points of offense against Kentucky. Shouldn't have happened under Will Muschamp. You've got to get that pointed in the right direction. Also, if you're going to overachieve, if you're Will Muschamp in South Carolina, get closer to Georgia, get closer to Clemson. I think those really are going to be the benchmark. We talk about it at Florida and Dan Mullen and how soon can he beat Florida State. You've got to get at least in the ballpark of Clemson or Georgia if you're Will Muschamp in South Carolina. Then I'll tell you he's an overachiever. Then you get to your 10th win, then you get to your 11th win, and you start making noise on the national scene. Then I'll say, boy, he's really done some things at South Carolina you didn't expect.
I want to read a couple comments from a couple Florida fans on Will Muschamp because they're both really interesting. Morgan Rectian says, Will Muschamp once said that if he'd still be at Florida had he hired Kurt Roper earlier. Rick Keene says that what Andy Staples wrote was an easy article to write. He did go 11-2 at Florida, then he busted. Or is it burst? I think he has learned a lesson about cutting Roper. I think that he's going to do fine. I think with what both Rick and Morgan bring up here, going back to his time at Florida, the truth is, if you're a defensive-minded head coach, finding a good offense is just hard.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Identifying a good offensive coordinator and finding your quarterback and scoring points, that's just really hard to do. There are about half the SEC teams at any given year who are trying to figure that kind of stuff out. Muschamp is not really unique in that regard.
It's so tough because I feel like as a defensive coach, you really have to put some of your blueprint down on the offense. I think that Kirby Smart did that beautifully at Georgia. I think he said, listen, we're going to be tough up front. This offensive line's got to be good. Nick Saban's obviously done a fabulous job of it at Alabama. But I think you hear Jeremy Pruitt starting to do that at Tennessee as well. I think he goes to Tennessee and says, listen, we're going to be pro-style. We're going to run the ball when we want to run the ball. We're really going to be able to put the hammer down on 3rd and short. I think that's a great look for Tennessee fans because that's really, you have to put that trademark down. I'm not sure Will Muschamp did that when he was at Florida. I think he trusted too much, and I think that Florida is still trying to rebound from some of the decisions he made.
Will Puckett says, if Muschamp can't win without a great offensive coordinator, is he doomed the way it seems to work out now, with coordinators becoming head coaches after a couple successful years? That's why finding good OCs is so hard, because they do become head coaches so quickly. He's got Dan Warner now working as a head coach. I guess Brian McClendon's the official offensive coordinator. McClendon's obviously an up-and-comer in the coaching ranks. We'll see if it gets better here, but the fact that he saw fit to make the change with Roper is something different about him now than maybe existed in Florida.
I think that's the whole story. I think that you really feel like I said, he's growing. I feel like there's new heights to be reached. I didn't love Kurt Roper's offense. To me, at times, they looked like they weren't sure what direction they were headed. And the Kentucky game last year was a perfect example of that. 13 points against that Kentucky defense just wasn't good enough for South Carolina. And all the pieces you had as part of that offense. You've got a ton of playmakers. They had an above-average offensive line. And probably a lot of South Carolina fans would argue that point. But they had an above-average offensive line. So they've got to find a direction. I really liked what they saw. And obviously, Brian McClendon taking over in that bowl game against Michigan. You put up 26 points against what was probably a top 5 defense in the country last year in Michigan in that bowl game. I thought that was a huge step forward for them.
On the comment section over on YouTube, Logan Westerman says that he still thinks that Will Muschamp's got some stuff to prove. G. Gray sort of disagrees with the comparison to Dan Mullen, saying that Mullen's going to build a big winner here at Florida. Here's my final point on this entire subject. Florida had no choice but to fire Will Muschamp. They just had to.
Yeah.
But had Muschamp done just enough to save his job, I think he's still at Florida. I think he's a very popular coach right now. I think I think that Muschamp would have eventually figured things out. He just had crummy offenses too many years in a row.
Yeah, I mean, how many times do you hear about head coaches that are willing to go to bat for their assistants? Listen, I think Mike Shula was one of those guys when I was at Alabama. He didn't want to fire any of his assistant coaches. And I think that Kurt Roper and Will Muschamp were close friends. I don't think he wanted to do it at Florida. That's why I think it's a huge growing moment to see that happen for Will Muschamp and see him to be able to move on and understand we need to make some changes if South Carolina is going to overachieve like we began talking about in the segment.
All right, let's move on here. Let's do item number 8 on our SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list. Devante Smith, one of the heroes for Alabama at the end of the 2017 season, catches the touchdown that wins the national championship game. You might imagine first practice to start 2018. He's ready to build on that, become one of the centerpiece wide receivers for the Crimson Tide. As Lee Corso would say, not so fast, my friend, because Devante Smith apparently spent a good portion, or at least some portion that's open for interpretation, of the first spring practice of 2018, not even practicing at wide receiver, practicing at defensive back. Nick Saban was asked about that, and Saban was, well, classic Nick Saban. Here is the explanation from the coach.
Well, he could play corner, but that's not our plan for him. We're just look, we don't have enough guys in the secondary right now. We recruited some good players. Hopefully that they'll come on in the fall. They're not here in the spring. Savion's the only guy that's here. So, you know, we've done a lot of this kind of stuff. Christian Jones, you know, we taught him how to play defensive back. So what we do is an individual, which is when you're there. So I should probably change this and let him go with the receivers while you're there, and then I'll work with them when you're not there. Then I wouldn't have to answer these kind of questions. All right, but just to be totally transparent, like I always am about everything that we do, you know, he works individual with the corners. All right, then he plays receiver the rest of the practice. Now, I'm sure your next question is how many reps is he getting and who's he splitting time with and who's he competing with and what team's he on and where's he at on the depth chart, none of which we have an answer for. So I'll just take the questions right out of your mouth.
I love that from Saban. I just think it's really funny. I assume that surely these coaches are aware. For those of you that don't know, media gets to see some practice at a place like Alabama. It's a very, very short window, like 7 or 8 minutes sometimes. Yeah. I mean, it can be really, really short. Sometimes they say it's 10, ends up being like 7. I mean, it's really short. But I'm always assuming that a guy like Saban knows the part the media gets to see. My thought is always he wouldn't put Devante out there unless he wanted the media to see it. Is Saban being honest here when he says that he's mad that it got pointed out, or was this put out there so the media would notice it? For some reason, I assume the latter, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think that Nick Saban, I think what he's trying to do is put it in. We talked about Gardner Minshew being an insurance policy at the quarterback position. I think Nick Saban's trying to put in an insurance policy back there in the secondary. This is an opportunity before these 4 guys arrive in the fall or over the summer, before Patrick Surtain gets there. You're trying to remake the entire secondary. You're losing 6 guys from last year. You're dealing with guys that names haven't even been seen on the football field. Jared Baden, Trevon Diggs, obviously, Shaheem Carter, Deontay Thompson, Xavier McKinney. This is an opportunity for him to get over there and say, you know what, at the end of the game, if we have to have our best guy out there, he at least knows a little bit of the basic defensive skills needed. I think this is a perfect opportunity to do it. I don't know, what he saw as far as the media period goes. I know that Nick Saban knows everything. Everything is planned out to a T, so he obviously had an idea that was going to happen out there. But I think this is just an insurance policy. I don't think it's that big a deal, but I think it's interesting to look at.
Will Puckett in the comment section on Facebook, and I'm not trying to stir up trouble, but can't help but notice, he says Saban's just trying to make up on missing Tyson Campbell. I mean, it is a little bit true that
are we really going down that road?
Come on, I mean,
missing on Tyson Campbell. I don't think he ever thought he was getting Tyson Campbell, did he?
But it is. You do have to sort of notice here this thing of, Alabama's not used to having to slide guys around. Now, Tyson Campbell wouldn't be going through spring practice anyway. He's a summer enrollee. Yeah. But, this notion of we're going to slide Devante Smith, let him play defensive back. We're going to, move this guy around to this position over here. This is a little bit of a shell game that Saban doesn't normally have to play with his talent. I mean, you can't help but notice.
No, he did this last year. Trevon Diggs moved over from wide receiver to the secondary. He's done this every year.
Come on now, Devante Smith is a big name wide receiver to be playing defense.
Oh, he definitely is.
That's a big name. And listen, I mean, there's a case to be made. There's more money to be made as a cornerback than there is a wide receiver. So, maybe this is a move that benefits Smith were to become more permanent. But if it's not permanent, you're taking a former elite recruit that you took from the state of Louisiana and saying, okay, we need you to go practice at defensive backs. We don't have enough bodies. That's a pretty unorthodox choice.
Let me meet you halfway on this argument. I definitely think he doesn't have the bodies right now that he wants to. I mean, you're looking at 4 guys, and Patrick Surtain and Eddie Smith and Jalen Armour-Davis showing up in the fall and having to get them ready to play. But I don't think you can narrow it down and say, boy, they didn't get Tyson Campbell, or boy, they didn't. I mean, Isaac Taylor Stewart, or whoever else you want to name. I don't think that anybody looks at it like that. They've still got a ton of talent in the secondary. I mean, that's just the bottom line. I think Devante Smith just kind of adds to that. I think a lot of people have seen him as kind of a two-way player since he got to Alabama. I'll meet you halfway on that. He doesn't have the body he's used to, but this is not even close to being the first time he's switched somebody from offense to defense.
I think the number that I heard is they've only got 6 early enrollees. That is pretty low for Alabama.
6 early enrollees. I don't know what's low or not. Is that a low number of early enrollees?
It's not the lowest number ever.
This is still so new to me, because this is not something that happened when I was in college.
Yeah, 6 is not a super high number.
I don't know. I know Patrick Surtain's not there yet, and he's going to get there in the fall. And I think there's obviously 3 other DBs that I think are coming along.
It's not like embarrassingly low, but for a program like Alabama, you sign the full 25, guys and things like that. You might get.
Oh, he didn't sign 25.
That's what I'm saying. If you do sign the full class like that,
you
might get 7 or 8 or 9 enrollees.
Savion Smith got there early, but they're still waiting on the rest of the guys. So listen, the numbers game, he's having to play it right now. That's the only reason Devante Smith's over there.
Michael Cooper in the comment section says, I love how at the beginning of every answer, Saban starts off sounding annoyed, then graduates to a full-on stop bothering me. The truth is, when you watch, like I watch a lot of these press conferences, I see Saban's facial expression. Like he almost has a little bit of just a little tiny sliver of a smile more than you realize. Now, maybe not on this one as much, but a lot of this is just theatrics, though, right?
Oh, no doubt. And listen, when you talk to Mark Burnett or any of these beat writers at SEC Country, or any beat writer that covers Alabama, they joke along with Nick Saban. I think where Nick Saban gets irritated is when the guy that comes in from ESPN or CBS Sports and shows up twice a week, and it's a question Nick's answered a week ago, and they say, "Hey Nick, how's Tua look today?" And Nick's like, "Listen, I know that's what you want. You're going back to write your article. It's going to be this big production, but I'm telling you, I don't care, and this is not something I'm paying attention to."
Kerry Stone says Saban knows what he wants. Winners usually do, and that's a pretty funny line from Kerry there. Here's the real thing that Saban does in press conferences. It's not so much bullying the media as it is going on long tangents so he can take fewer questions. Like, I've been in a couple Saban press conferences before, even some sort of impromptu press conferences. That's his big move. He gives very long answers, so it limits the number of questions he can be asked.
Not only that, but Nick knows what's coming, so he's got this long one prepared for when somebody hits the tripwire. And there's, if you watch Nick Saban's press conferences, every now and then, like, somebody won't get to the question that he wants. And so at the end of the press, he'll be like, "You know what? Nobody asked me this, so I'm going to tell you what I think about it." It's absolutely hilarious to me.
Let's do item number 9 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. If y'all can keep from strangling us for doing a little bit of basketball here for a moment, we're in Atlanta. That's where we do the show every single day. And, well, one of the SEC teams is in our fair city today. It's the Kentucky Wildcats. Atlanta for a long time has been known as Catlanta. And Kentucky is right at home here as the participant in the regional in Atlanta here this weekend. They'll play tonight. Let me see if I can even get all 4 of these teams. They're playing Kansas State. The other game is Loyola, however you pronounce it, Loyola and Nevada, I believe. When you have the bracket open up like this for Kentucky, and of course SEC Country is going to be all over the coverage, including on Facebook Live later on this evening. But when you have the bracket open up like this, I mean, are the Wildcats a lot now to make the Final Four? Is it as easy as saying they're an overwhelming favorite against all 4 of these teams, or is there still a concern in the back of your mind about Kentucky?
I think they should be a lock, and I think that if you're a Kentucky fan, you're looking at it and thinking it's a disappointment if they don't get to the Final Four, because you look at what is in front of them, and I think that, listen, I think they blow Kansas State out of the water, and I think whoever wins that Nevada-Loyola game isn't even close to Kentucky, and they shouldn't be close to Kentucky. Yeah. When you look at the way they've played, and I'll give you credit, starting with the SEC tournament, they rolled through that. You said Kentucky would win. I said Tennessee would win. Both those teams faced off in the championship game, and Kentucky has looked absolutely incredible. I mean, they've looked like a team that has been unstoppable for the best part of March so far. And so I think when Kentucky fans look at it, they do think this should be a completely free and easy road at Phillips Arena to get to this Final Four, no doubt.
Rick Keene, I knew this was coming. He says, basketball and Kentucky at that? Boo. It's topic number 9. It's not like, we've done the whole show. I do want to squeeze in one more quick basketball note here for a moment, though, for item number 10. And this is a little bit off the beaten path, off the radar. I find this fascinating, and as you pointed out the other day, this is sort of that rare moment when the Alabama grad and the big-time Georgia fan in a position to defend Auburn a little bit. You may remember the other day when Auburn was getting blasted by Clemson in the NCAA tournament. Tony Barbee, the former Auburn coach, now Kentucky assistant, tweeted the laughing emoji. We all sort of took that as a jab against Auburn because the timing was just too perfect not to be. Well, Barbee was quoted by Kyle Tucker from SECCountry.com saying, my emoji had nothing to do with basketball. I wasn't watching games. It had nothing to do with basketball or any university, so I don't know why people took it that way. Do you believe for 1 second what Tony Barbee's saying here?
Tony, nobody believes you, man. I mean, now you're just making a fool of yourself. You made a fool of yourself before. Now you're just making a fool of yourself, and you're really trying to pull this kind of veil over what's going on. Don't lie to anybody. I think this makes him look so small. I think this makes him look about this tall right now. When you talk about him kind of, first of all, doing it in the first place, you look terrible. Then trying to tell me that just the laughing emoji during the Auburn game is not what you're talking about. There was no other hashtag. There was nobody. There was nothing else happening. So either it was an extremely dumb tweet, or you look about this tall right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's plausible deniability, but you're right. The whole ordeal makes Barbee look completely unhireable as a head coach ever again. I hope he enjoys recruiting for Kentucky because that's all he's ever going to be doing. No. He's going to be getting John Calipari's dry cleaning. He's going to be recruiting players. He's not really qualified to do anything else.
Yeah, it's tough too because what is there, 360 Division I basketball teams? I think he could land somewhere, but I'm telling you right now, I wouldn't want this guy anywhere near my program after the stuff he said.
I don't believe he's getting a letter of recommendation from anybody on the plane.
I don't think so either.
All right, here on SEC Country Live, we're always looking to close the show the same way every day. We call this our champion of life, and unfortunately, in honor of the guy who started it all, Butch Jones, actually makes another appearance in our Champion of Life today. We gave you some Saban audio a moment ago, and another subject that came up during the Nick Saban press conference here to start the Alabama spring practice was the role that Butch Jones, the former Tennessee head coach, was going to fill in Tuscaloosa. You mentioned a moment ago making somebody look small. Saban here almost goes out of his way to make Butch Jones look small. Listen to Saban, the description he gives of the guy who started the Champions of Life. Take a listen to this.
We saw Butch out there today. Can you elaborate on kind of what his role is now with the team and just?
Well, he's an intern, an analyst. I guess we could have several names for it. He can't coach on the field. He can work with us off the field. And he today was actually the first time that he was cleared by the NCAA.
So everybody on the other side of the glass over here is laughing. You can't call him an intern. Why does Saban call him an intern? I mean, that's a bad job.
On Saban's part?
Calling him an intern?
Listen, he's an intern. I mean, that's what he is. He kind of stops himself here. Well, he's an intern, an analyst.
Intern is typically like a college student getting college course credit for being somewhere. Butch Jones is getting paid. He's getting paid.
I was going to say he's getting paid like what, $24K a year or something like that. I mean,
it's not a lot of money. That's not an intern. An intern's there to learn.
I don't know what the official name is. Offensive analyst. I guess you'd rather be called.
I don't have a problem with Saban hiring Butch Jones. I've explained that over and over again, but you can't call him an intern.
Why not? I mean, listen, we got a segment called "This is really literally the Champion of Life." Butch Jones is dug his own hole.
That's a demeaning term.
It might be. It might be. Maybe. Listen, I don't think any Alabama fans are going to hate it. Butch Jones being called an intern. I don't think any Georgia fans or Florida fans or anybody's really going to hate it for that matter.
Well, we appreciate you being with us on the show today. Make sure to check out our podcast. It's going to be up for you on Apple Podcasts, Android devices, all the various ways to find the podcast. It'll be up for you right after the show. Also, be a huge favor to us. A lot of you like to watch the show on YouTube. A lot of you like to watch the show on Facebook. Share the show with your friends. Let them know we're talking about the SEC each and every afternoon, Monday through Thursday here on SEC Country Live. We're off for the weekend, but we'll be back again on Monday. Whatever you do this weekend, hope you enjoy it. Stay safe, and we'll see you again on Monday for another episode of SEC Country Live.